September 19th, 1944. Dawn broke over the wooded hills near Nancy, France, with a pale grey light that revealed little but the promise of violence. The ground was slick with mud from a night's rain, puddles reflecting the silhouettes of tall pines, as if nature itself was bracing for the clash to come. A German Panther, heavy and menacing, crept forward along a narrow road, its steel tracks grinding through the earth with the slow inevitability of a guillotine blade. Inside, the crew muttered with the grim assurance of men who believed themselves masters of the battlefield. Their 75mm high-velocity gun, with its devastating penetration, had humbled every Allied tank it had faced. Their doctrine was clear: nothing on wheels could outgun or outrun them. And yet, this morning, they would witness something that defied their training, their experience, and their imagination. The Panthers' commander, peering through binoculars, caught movement at the far edge of a clearing, a blur low, sleek, impossibly fast. At first he thought it was a reconnaissance car, some sacrificial scout racing for cover, but then it turned its turret. A gun flashed. The shockwave rippled across the clearing. Moments later, a German half-track erupted into a column of smoke and fire. The blur did not stop. It darted sideways, kicked up dirt, then vanished behind a hedgerow. The Panther crew blinked in disbelief. No tank could move like that. Not at this range, not on this terrain. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Bundes Archive, Panther crew diary fragment. Further down the line, two more of these phantom shapes appeared, skimming across the muddy fields as though the laws of weight and steel had been rewritten. German gunners swung their optics, trying to catch up, but the targets slipped from their sights before their fingers could tighten on the trigger. One moment they were there, black smoke trailing from their exhaust pipes, and the next they had vanished again, reappearing at an impossible angle, their cannons flashing with surgical precision. From the tree line, American voices crackled over radios, urgent but calm, like the whispers of a chess master moving pieces across a board invisible to the enemy. Target marked. Fire. Relocate. Orders carried through the ether, seamless and immediate, a chorus of coordination the Germans could neither hear nor fathom. On the ground, these machines responded as if they were alive, darting and weaving in a deadly dance. The effect was disorienting, like trying to swat at shadows with iron fists. U.S. Army After Action Report, September 1944. For the Germans accustomed to duels of brute force, armor against armor, gun against gun, this was something else entirely. A battle not of slow advances and grinding attrition, but of sudden appearance and shocking disappearance. A new predator had entered the battlefield, and it hunted with a speed that mocked the lumbering pride of the Wehrmacht's steel. Panic flickered across hardened faces. Reports of Panther kills streamed over German radios, laced with confusion. Enemy vehicles faster than reconnaissance cannot track, impossible to hit. The truth was stranger than any rumor. What they had seen was the M18 Hellcat, the fastest armored fighting vehicle of the Second World War, a machine so light, so agile, and so ferociously quick that German crews compared it not to a tank, but to a ghost, a demon of steel that could appear, strike, and vanish before a Panther's turret could complete its ponderous arc. It was not supposed to exist. It was not supposed to threaten them, and yet here it was, shredding convoys, crippling columns, and humiliating the pride of German engineering. The sound of it was unforgettable, a deep-throated roar of its radial engine that built to a scream as it accelerated, tearing across roads at speeds German crews thought suicidal. But it was not suicide, it was doctrine, it was design. It was a weapon built not to withstand the hammer of the enemy, but to slip past it, to outpace it, to outthink it. Where Panthers and Tigers embodied the philosophy of heavy armor, immovable, indestructible fortresses of steel, the Hellcat embodied the opposite, speed as armor, movement as survival. On that cold morning near Nancy, the German commander barked for his gunner to fire. The Panzer's 75mm cannon thundered, the shell hurtling toward the blur of the Hellcat, but the shot hit only churned earth and a tree that splintered like matchsticks. The Hellcat was already gone, darting to the flank, its turret swiveling with impossible grace. Then came the counterstrike. A 76mm shell screamed across the field, slamming into a Panzer IV parked behind the Panther. Fire engulfed the German vehicle, a pillar of black smoke marking the kill. The Hellcat did not pause to celebrate. It vanished again, sprinting down the road, a phantom of velocity. To the German crew, it was humiliation, being bested not by heavier firepower, but by speed, by guile, by a machine that seemed to dance just beyond their reach. Panic seeped into discipline. Crews muttered that the Americans had built something unnatural, something unfair. Their heavy tanks, once symbols of invincibility, now felt like cornered beasts, too slow, too clumsy, too exposed. Bundesarchiv, Fragmentary Report, September 1944. For the Americans, the effect was electrifying. Infantrymen cheered as the Hellcats thundered past them, their speed a promise of protection, their sudden strikes a shield against the terror of German armor. Convoys rolled forward with renewed confidence, emboldened by the knowledge that these racing hunters were somewhere ahead, prowling for targets. Even seasoned officers paused in wonder at the sheer audacity of it. Machines that weighed nearly 20 tons behaving as if they were racing cars, threading the chaos of battle with a grace that defied expectation. The battlefield became theater, smoke rising, engines screaming, steel clashing, and in the center of it all, the duel of doctrines. The Germans with their philosophy of dominance through strength, of overwhelming firepower and armor. The Americans with a new creed, mobility as supremacy, speed as salvation. And as the sun climbed higher over Nancy, painting the fields in harsh light, the Panther crew realized a chilling truth. They were not fighting on their own terms anymore. The enemy had changed the rules of the game. Their dominance of the battlefield was slipping, undermined not by thicker armor or bigger guns, but by velocity itself. The day was not yet lost, but the seed of doubt had been planted. If these machines could appear here, in Lorraine, what would stop them from appearing anywhere? If they could outpace the vaunted Panthers, what else might the Americans be hiding in their arsenals? In that moment, as the Hellcats disappeared once more into the forest roads, leaving behind burning wrecks and shattered confidence, the German crew knew they were witnessing the beginning of something new, a weapon unlike anything they had prepared for, a weapon that rewrote the meaning of armored warfare. And as the smoke drifted and the echoes of battle faded, one haunting question lingered in the minds of the German crews. If speed could defeat armor, what did that mean for the future of war? The answer was coming, and it would reshape the course of the conflict. But first, the world needed to understand how the battlefield had reached this moment. 1944 was a year of reckoning. The tide of the Second World War had already begun to turn, but the outcome was anything but assured. From the beaches of Normandy to the rugged forests of the Ardennes, Europe was a vast chessboard of advancing armies and desperate defenses. The Allies, having clawed their way ashore in France on June 6, pressed inland with an urgency that drained their fuel, stretched their supply lines and tested their nerve. Yet the Germans, battered but unbroken, countered with a brutal efficiency born of years of war. Here in the fields and towns of France, doctrines clashed as violently as steel against steel. For the Germans, the doctrine of armored supremacy had always been their sharpest blade. The Panther, introduced in 1943, embodied that philosophy, a beast of nearly 45 tons, boasting sloped armor up to 120 millimeters thick at the front, and armed with the fearsome K-42 L-70, a 75 mm high-velocity cannon, capable of killing Shermans at ranges where American guns could barely scratch its paint. German armored doctrine emphasized killing from afar, exploiting superior optics, and crushing enemy tanks with devastating first-shot accuracy. This approach had humbled the Red Army at Kursk, and it instilled in German crews a confidence bordering on arrogance. Bundesarchiv Panzertruppen reports, 1943-44. The Americans, by contrast, had never intended to fight the Germans on their own terms. Their pre-war doctrine, shaped by generals like Adna Chaffee, and later codified in manuals, insisted that tanks were not for fighting tanks. Tanks were for breakthrough, exploitation, and infantry support. Tank destroyers, lighter, faster, and armed for ambush, were to handle enemy armor. Thus was born the Tank Destroyer Command, a unique arm of the U.S. Army built around speed and mobility, rather than brute force. According to U.S. Army doctrinal studies, tank destroyers were to seek, strike, and destroy enemy armor, using maneuver and surprise as their primary weapons. U.S. Army Field Manual, 18-5, 1942. The doctrine met reality in fire and blood. In North Africa, Shermans had been caught and butchered by Panzer IVs, and later by Tigers. In Italy, narrow passes and German defensive genius blunted Allied offensives, and in Normandy, the hedgerows turned every field into a killing ground. Casualties mounted, reports circulated of Panther shells punching through Shermans as though their armor were tissue. The pressure for something new, something faster, something deadlier, grew unbearable. The M18 Hellcat entered this crucible. Its designers at Buick, under General Motors, had been tasked with creating a vehicle unlike anything before. It was not meant to slug it out with Panthers toe-to-toe. It was meant to move, to exploit, to outflank. At 20 tons, it was barely half the weight of a Panther, but it carried a 76 gun with enough bite to pierce German armor at close and medium ranges. Its real advantage, however, was speed 50 to 55 miles per hour on roads, a figure so astonishing that tank crews compared it to a racing car. This was not hyperbole, it was physics turned into doctrine. Technical Manual, TM 9374, 1944. By the late summer of 1944, the war in Western Europe was a war of momentum. The German army reeled backward, yet still lashed out with deadly counterattacks. Their armored spearheads, built around Panthers and Tigers, sought to stall the Allied advance by sheer terror of their presence. For American soldiers on the ground, facing such machines was an exercise in courage and desperation. Infantrymen whispered about the Panthers as invincible monsters. Tank crews joked grimly about bringing Ronsons into battle, a cruel nickname for the Shermans' tendency to ignite when hit. And yet, the strategic situation was changing. The Allies had overwhelming numbers by mid-1944. The U.S. Army alone fielded 89 divisions in Europe, supported by tens of thousands of tanks, artillery pieces, and aircraft. The Germans, drained by the Eastern Front and strangled by fuel shortages, could not replace their losses at the same rate. Still, their armored divisions remained deadly, striking with precision in places like Mortain and later in the Ardennes. Against this backdrop, the M18 Hellcat emerged not as a footnote, but as a solution to a doctrinal problem. The Allies did not need to match the Panther in brute strength. They needed to nullify it, to break the psychological dominance that German armor had imposed. The Hellcat was designed to turn that dominance into vulnerability, to exploit speed and maneuver in ways the Germans had not prepared for. The Germans were slow to recognize what they were facing. Initial reports described light tanks that moved at speeds uncharacteristic of armored vehicles. Panther commanders complained of targets that disappeared before they could bring their guns to bear. Crews dismissed the M18 as reckless, until convoys began to burn, until Panthers found themselves flanked, until the vaunted confidence of German optics and steel was shattered by machines that treated the battlefield like a racetrack. Captured German interrogation reports, SAF Archives, October 1944. This clash of doctrines extended far beyond the battlefield. It shaped strategy itself. Eisenhower's staff sought ways to keep the pressure on Germany, driving deep thrusts that risked overextension. Patton, with his Third Army, demanded speed above all else, pushing his divisions across France in a whirlwind of dust and fire. For such offensives, a vehicle like the Hellcat was not merely useful, it was essential. It could scout, screen, exploit, and strike, perfectly embodying the lightning advances Patton demanded. But the stakes were higher than any one doctrine. By late 1944, the war had entered its bloodiest phase. Every month brought staggering casualties. In September alone, the Allies suffered over 60,000 in France and Belgium. German losses, though mounting, were equally dire. Each clash of armor meant lives measured in the hundreds, towns reduced to rubble, and fields littered with burning machines. In such a crucible, speed and surprise became not luxuries but necessities. As autumn set in, rain turning roads into rivers of mud, the Germans believed their heavy armor could still dominate, that their Panthers and Tigers could anchor defenses strong enough to stall the Allied tide. But they had not yet reckoned with the full measure of what the Hellcat could do. They had not yet seen the speed turned into a doctrine, the machine wielded not recklessly but surgically. The war was entering a phase where every weapon, every doctrine, every advantage would be tested to its limit. And in this clash of titans, the M18 Hellcat would prove itself not merely as a machine of steel and fire, but as a symbol of an idea that speed when mastered could be more lethal than armor itself. But to understand why German crews were so stunned by the Hellcat's performance, one must first uncover the hidden factor that transformed this fast light vehicle into a true predator, something beyond its gun and its engine, something that redefined the battlefield in ways even the Germans could not anticipate. The secret was about to be revealed. In the chaos of September 1944, when German armor pressed relentlessly and American columns surged forward through the French countryside, the M18 Hellcat appeared to many as nothing more than an impossibly fast tank destroyer. Its speed was shocking, its silhouette unusual, and its sudden appearances unnerving. But there was something deeper, a hidden factor, subtle but decisive, that gave the Hellcat its edge. To the Germans it seemed almost supernatural. How could these fragile machines appear in the right place, at the right time, every time? The answer was not just in steel or horsepower. It was in the invisible threads of communication, coordination, and doctrine that made the Hellcat more than a machine. It was part of a system, a weapon forged from both technology and thought. The hidden advantage was speed. Yes, but speed combined with control. To the German crews, accustomed to ponderous duels, the Hellcat's movements were disorienting, like fighting an enemy who fought in 3 dimensions while they remained bound to 2. It was not simply the top speed, 55 miles per hour on roads, 20 to 25 cross-country, but the ability to exploit terrain with surgical precision. The Hellcat's torsion bar suspension allowed it to glide over ground that jarred heavier tanks into sluggish response. The Buick-built radial engine screamed like a fighter plane engine, pushing it forward with an acceleration no Panther could dream of. Technical Manual TM9 374, 1944. Yet speed alone could have spelled disaster without discipline. The U.S. Army's tank destroyer doctrine drilled crews to strike like wolves, appear suddenly, fire quickly, and then vanish before retaliation. Radio coordination was the key. Every Hellcat carried powerful SCR 508 radios, ensuring that platoons and companies acted in unison, slipping into ambush positions, flanking with perfect timing, and retreating before German optics found their mark. It was a level of synchronization German crews could neither see nor replicate. U.S. Army Signal Corps Records, 1944. From the German perspective, this invisible factor was maddening. Reports describe frustration. Panthers lining up their guns, only for targets to vanish into woods. Convoys expecting easy prey finding themselves bracketed by accurate fire from unexpected angles. One dramatized recollection from a Panther gunner captures the disbelief. They came like hunters, fast, reckless, we fired, but they were gone, always gone, and another of our vehicles was burning. Dramatized composite. This was the American answer to German dominance. The Wehrmacht believed in killing power at range. Their optics, their gunnery, their entire doctrine centered on striking the first fatal blow. The Hellcat flipped that paradigm. Its crews knew they could not win at long distances. They closed the gap, used speed to shorten the battlefield, and struck before the Panthers' crew could adjust their optics. It was asymmetric warfare at its most effective. The hidden advantage was psychological as much as mechanical. For German crews, every engagement with the Hellcat became a test of nerves. Could they track it before it flanked them? Could they guess where it would appear next? The uncertainty eroded the confidence that Panthers and Tigers had instilled in German divisions since Kursk. A Panther commander noted in his diary, "It is not their strength we fear, it is their speed." A new devil on wheels. Bonder's Kharkiv, September 1944. And yet, the Hellcat's vulnerability was obvious. Its armor was paper-thin, 25 millimeters at best, incapable of stopping even small-caliber fire at close range. A single hit from a German 75 mm or 88 mm meant certain death. Crews knew this. They climbed into their machines with the grim understanding that survival depended on never being hit at all. The hidden advantage, therefore, was courage married to doctrine. American tank destroyer crews embraced speed as their only armor. To fight in a Hellcat was to accept that hesitation meant destruction. This philosophy, movement over mass, agility over brute strength, clashed violently with German thinking. Panthers relied on thickness and firepower. Hellcats relied on timing and maneuver. It was a duel of philosophies, and when Hellcats struck true, the Germans were left speechless. Enemy disbelief hardened into bitter frustration. Captured interrogation transcripts revealed German officers mocking the Hellcat as a death trap, but the mockery hid unease. They admitted that the Hellcat's speed made American ambushes unpredictable, its sudden flanking maneuvers terrifying. Search F. Interrogation Reports 1944. The hidden advantage also lay in the American way of war itself. Production lines in Detroit could replace losses with astonishing speed. A destroyed Hellcat could be replaced in weeks, while a destroyed Panther drained Germany's dwindling industry for months. This resilience gave American crews confidence. They fought knowing reinforcements would come. German crews fought knowing replacements would not. To the German tankers, this imbalance was salt in the wound. They might knock out a Hellcat, perhaps even a platoon, but more would appear, racing forward, hunting with radios and speed. It was like fighting an enemy that refused to bleed. The Hellcat's crews, many barely in their 20s, embraced this doctrine with a mixture of fear and pride. They knew they sat atop the fastest armored fighting vehicle in the world. They spoke of their machines as stallions, wild and untamed, demanding courage to master. Veterans later recalled the exhilaration of tearing across fields, engines screaming, shells slamming out of their 76mm cannons with deadly accuracy, and always, the thought at the back of their minds, never stop moving, never let the enemy's sights settle. This was the hidden advantage that left German crews stunned. It was not a single factor, but the union of several: speed beyond belief, radios that linked every move, doctrine that turned fragility into ferocity, and the will of crews who fought knowing hesitation was death. The Hellcat was no Panther killer by brute force. It was a Panther killer by art, by deception, by movement. And when German crews saw it streak past them, when they watched convoys erupt in fire before their optics could even settle, they realized they were facing something they had never trained for, something that undermined their confidence, their doctrine, their very understanding of battle. On the battlefields of France, the Hellcat revealed that hidden advantage with every ambush, every sudden strike, every burning wreck left in its wake. And as the Germans struggled to comprehend what they were facing, the Americans prepared to unleash this doctrine on an even larger stage. The moment was coming when speed, precision, and doctrine would collide with German armor in one of the fiercest duels of the war. And there, the hidden advantage would prove itself in fire and blood. Steel, speed, and sacrifice. These were the raw ingredients of the M18 Hellcat. To the casual observer, it looked like a stripped-down Sherman, smaller, lighter, somehow incomplete. But beneath its thin shell was a machine born of engineering audacity, designed not to endure blows but to dance around them. Where German engineers built fortresses of steel, American engineers built a Predator on wheels. And in that decision lay the secret to one of the most remarkable vehicles of the Second World War. At just over 20 tons, the Hellcat was half the weight of a Panther. Its armor thickness ranged from a meager 12 mm on the sides to 25 mm at its thickest. In practical terms, this meant that even German machine guns could punch through at close range, and any hit from a tank cannon guaranteed fiery destruction. American designers understood this and did not attempt to disguise it. The Hellcat's armor was never intended to withstand blows. It was meant to buy seconds the slimmest margin of survival, while speed did the rest. Technical Manual TM 9374, 1944. That speed was legendary. Powered by the Wright R975 radial engine, a 9-cylinder, air-cooled gasoline engine originally built for aircraft, the Hellcat could scream down roads at 50 to 55 miles per hour. No tank or tank destroyer of the war came close. Even the vaunted Panther and Tiger I, with all their mechanical precision, rarely topped 28 miles per hour under ideal conditions. The Hellcat could double that. Its torsion bar suspension, revolutionary at the time, allowed it to maintain high speeds over rough terrain that rattled heavier tanks into sluggish immobility. Ordnance depth. Testing report. Aberdeen Proving Ground, 1943. Armament gave the Hellcat its fangs. The 76 mm M1A2 gun it carried was the same weapon later fitted to upgraded Shermans. With armor-piercing rounds, it could penetrate 109 mm of armor at 500 meters, enough to punch through the sides of a Panther or even the front of a Panzer IV. Against the Tiger I, the Hellcat struggled at long ranges, but at close quarters and with HVAP high-velocity armor-piercing ammunition, it could deliver lethal strikes. Ammunition stowage was limited, forcing crews to balance their shots with discipline. Yet when the moment came, that 76 mm barked with authority. Ballistics test. U.S. Army Ordnance Depth, 1944. Firepower and speed were matched by radios. Every Hellcat carried the SCR 508 set, ensuring instant coordination between platoons. This was no luxury. Radios were the bloodstream of the Hellcat doctrine, allowing hunters to converge on German columns, to outflank lumbering Panthers, and to disengage the moment the tide turned. German tanks, though often fitted with radios, could not match the speed of execution these networks allowed. Signal Corps Training Circular, 1944. Inside, the Hellcat was cramped, Spartan, and merciless. Crews of 5 commander, gunner, loader, driver, assistant driver, worked shoulder to shoulder in a hull that offered little comfort and less safety. The open-topped turret, while exposing them to shrapnel and snipers, gave unparalleled visibility. Crews could scan fields and forests without the blind spots that plagued closed turrets. This vision, combined with radios, made them predators rather than prey, but it also demanded courage. Every shell burst overhead was a reminder that they lived inside a glass cannon. After-action interview. 805th Tank Destroyer Battalion, October 1944. Production reflected American industrial might. Built by Buick at the General Motors plant in Flint, Michigan, more than 2,500 Hellcats rolled off the lines between 1943 and 1944. Each cost approximately $57,500, a fraction of the cost of a Panther or Tiger, which consumed Germany's dwindling resources and labor. Hellcats arrived in battalions, ready to be replaced if destroyed, an expendability that no German vehicle could match. War Production Board Records, 1944. Comparisons told the story in stark relief. The Panther weighed 45 tons, had armor up to 120 mm thick, and carried a gun capable of slicing through Shermans at 2 kilometers. But it guzzled fuel, broke down frequently, and moved like a lumbering beast. The Hellcat, with its 20 tons, could not match the Panther in brute strength, but it could outflank, outmaneuver, and ambush it, striking from angles where German armor was weakest. The duel was unequal, but not in the way German crews expected. Panzerwaffe Field Report, Ardennes, December 1944. Even in maintenance, the Hellcat excelled. Its engine could be removed in 30 minutes by a trained crew, far faster than the multi-day efforts required to service Panthers. In a war of attrition, this mattered. Crews knew that if their Hellcat broke, it could be patched and returned to battle quickly, while German armor often languished for weeks awaiting parts. Ordnance Field Maintenance Guide, 1944. The Hellcat's technical specifications were not just numbers. They were doctrine encoded in steel. Its weight was light because it was not built to trade blows. Its engine was powerful because survival depended on outrunning death. Its gun was sharp enough to pierce, not dominate. Its open turret gave visibility, not protection. Each choice was deliberate, each compromise a reflection of a philosophy: speed above all. German engineers scoffed at such a design. To them it was madness to send men into battle with so little armor, yet the very madness was its brilliance. Crews who fought in Hellcats knew they were gambling with every engagement. But when the gamble paid off, when a Panther went up in smoke after being flanked at speed, the shock rippled through the enemy lines. To the Germans, the Hellcat seemed to break rules they had long taken for granted. A tank destroyer that could vanish into woods, reappear miles away, and strike before their turrets could traverse. A machine that refused to play by the physics of war as they understood it. They measured strength in thickness and caliber. The Americans measured it in velocity and timing. In every bolt and plate, the Hellcat embodied this philosophy. It was not invincible, not even durable, but it was fast, it was coordinated, and it was deadly when unleashed with cunning. And those qualities, woven together in Buick's factories and tested in the crucible of battle, gave it the power to terrify German crews who believed themselves unshakable. The numbers told the story. The experience told it louder, for when Hellcats rolled into battle, they did not fight alone. They fought as swarms, linked by radios, guided by doctrine, driven by the certainty that speed itself was their shield. And soon this design would face its ultimate test, not in skirmishes or ambushes, but in full-scale battle. There, against Panthers and Tigers, its technical brilliance would either vindicate the doctrine or expose it as folly. The stage was set for fire, for steel, for a reckoning written across the fields of Europe. November 19th, 1944. The sky above the Vosges Mountains hung heavy with mist, the kind that muffled sound and cloaked movement in a damp shroud of secrecy. Near the French town of Lunéville, columns of German armor advanced under the grey dawn, their panthers grinding forward with the slow arrogance of predators who believed the battlefield was theirs to dominate. The ground shook with each steel tread, and the forest whispered with the promise of violence yet to come. Waiting for them, hidden among the ridges and frost-dusted pines, was the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion. Their machines crouched like sprinters on the starting line, M18 Hellcats, their engines idling with the restrained growl of beasts barely contained. The crews sat tense inside their thin armor, nerves stretched taut, radios crackling with clipped instructions. To these men, every second would matter. They knew that their Hellcats could not survive a direct hit. The only armor they had was speed. U.S. Army After Action Report, November 1944. The Germans came into view, their columns snaking along the muddy road. Panthers led the vanguard, their guns sweeping across the fields, optics searching for prey. Behind them followed half-tracks and supply trucks, an entire spearhead thrusting toward the American lines. The German commanders believed they were on the attack, that their heavy armor would carve open another gap. What they did not know was that wolves were waiting in the fog. The first order came across the radio. Engage. A Hellcat roared to life, darting from cover with astonishing speed. Its engines screamed as it bounded into the open field, turret already swinging. The 76mm barked, and a German half-track exploded into fire. Before the Panther commander could even shout for a correction, the Hellcat vanished behind a hedgerow. It was not a duel. It was a strike and a disappearance, like a phantom. 704th TD Battalion War Diary, November 1944. German optics tracked the movement, guns turning, but too slowly. Another Hellcat emerged from the flank, racing at 40 miles per hour across the muddy ground, its open turret manned by grim-faced soldiers bracing for impact. The shot rang out, slamming into the side armor of a Panzer IV. Flames poured from the hatch as the crew scrambled, screaming into the cold air. The Hellcat did not linger. It slid back into the tree line, the smell of gasoline and gunpowder hanging in the mist. Panic rippled through the German column. Reports barked across their radios. Light tanks too fast to track, ambushed on flanks. The Panther commanders tried to regain order, calling their men to form a defensive line, but the fog betrayed them. Hellcats darted in and out, engines howling, shells slamming into trucks, artillery tractors and stragglers. The column staggered, wounded by invisible blows. Bundesaarchiv, Panzer Officer Report, November 1944. One Panther finally spotted a Hellcat as it streaked across a road. The German gunner fired, the 75mm shell screaming through the air. It struck, tearing through the Hellcat's thin armor. The vehicle burst into fire, its crew scrambling to escape the inferno. 3 men made it out, 2 did not. The survivors wept as they dragged their comrades into the tree line. For the Hellcat crews, every battle was a gamble against death, and on this day, the odds claimed their share. U.S. Army Casualty Report, 704th TD, November 1944. Yet for every loss, another Hellcat struck back. From a ridge to the east, two M18 Says coordinated fire. One revealed itself, drawing the gaze of a Panther's long barrel. The other, hidden, fired into its flank. The shell penetrated, setting the Panther ablaze. Its ammunition cooked off in a thunderous explosion, the turret blown skyward like a coin tossed into the heavens. German soldiers dove into ditches as flaming steel rained down. The battle unfolded not as a clash of titans, but as a hunt. Panthers lumbered, trying to fix targets, while Hellcats raced around them like wolves circling a wounded bear. Speed negated range. Agility undermined armor. Every kill was a testament to doctrine, that maneuver, not mass, decided survival. U.S. Army Tactical Evaluation, November 1944. By midday, the road to Lunéville was a graveyard of German steel. Burned-out trucks smoldered, half-tracks lay twisted in ditches, and at least 5 Panthers had been left as blackened hulks. The 704th lost Hellcats. Yes, but their sacrifice bought victory. The German advance had been halted cold, not by heavier armor, but by machines the enemy had dismissed as fragile curiosities. German prisoners captured later that day spoke with disbelief. One corporal muttered through clenched teeth, "They were like devils on wheels. No tank should move like that. We fired, always too late." Dramatized composite. The words captured the essence of the Hellcat's triumph. It was not invincibility. It was unpredictability. The cost, however, was felt deeply by the American crews. After the battle, survivors gathered near their burning machines, faces smeared with soot and grief. They spoke in hushed voices about comrades lost, about the thinness of the line between life and death. For them, the Hellcat was both savior and coffin, capable of feats no other machine could match, yet utterly unforgiving of mistakes. The first major clash between Hellcats and Panthers proved more than a tactical skirmish. It was a revelation. German dominance in armor was no longer absolute. A new doctrine had entered the field, one that valued speed and coordination over brute strength, and on that fog-drenched day in Lorraine, the Hellcat announced itself to history in fire and steel. But the war was far from over. Ahead lay greater tests, darker days, and battles where the stakes rose beyond individual ambushes. The Ardennes loomed, with its forests and snow, where the Hellcat would once again confront the might of German armor in battles that would decide the fate of Europe. The wolves had shown their teeth. Now the world would learn the true cost of unleashing them. December 1944. Snow fell thick and heavy across the Ardennes, muffling the landscape in deceptive silence. Beneath the canopy of winter trees, German armor massed for the last great offensive of the Reich, Operation Wacht am Rhein, the Battle of the Bulge. Panthers and tigers rolled through the frozen forests, their engines growling like predators awakened for a final hunt. For the American soldiers caught in their path, the sight was terrifying, giants of steel advancing through the blizzard, their guns promising death at unimaginable ranges. But hidden among the American defenses, waiting in small towns and icy ridges, were the wolves of the tank destroyer battalions, the M18 Hellcats. What unfolded in those desperate weeks would not only stop Germany's last gamble, but prove how much speed, doctrine and psychology could alter the balance of armored warfare. The Ardennes was chaos incarnate. Convoys jammed icy roads, infantry huddled in foxholes, and artillery thundered endlessly through snow-choked valleys. German morale surged in the opening days. Reports told of Panthers plowing through American lines, of Shermans knocked out by the dozen, of fear spreading through green troops unprepared for the winter onslaught. The Wehrmacht once again felt the intoxicating rush of armored supremacy, yet the deeper they pushed, the more they encountered an enemy who refused to play by their rules. U.S. Army Strategic Report, December 1944. The Hellcats' role in the Ardennes was brutal and unforgiving. In towns like Neuville, Bastogne and Saint-Fith, crews raced along icy roads at speeds no German tanker believed possible. Radios chattered with coordinated ambushes, platoons darting into villages, unleashing salvos, then disappearing into the snowy woods before Panthers could train their long barrels. For the Germans, the experience was infuriating. Their heavily armored beasts were built for domination, not for chasing phantoms. Their doctrine had not prepared them for enemies who struck and vanished with surgical precision. The psychological toll was immense. German prisoners captured after Hellcat ambushes described the machines with awe and dread. They were like hunters, one officer admitted. Not tanks, not vehicles, hunters who never let us breathe. Dramatized composite. Such statements reveal how the Hellcat shattered more than armor. It shattered the illusion of German invulnerability. For American infantry, the impact was the reverse. Troops pinned down by German fire spoke of Hellcats roaring past them like avenging angels, their open-topped turrets spitting fire as they cut through enemy convoys. The sight lifted morale in the darkest hours of the Bulge. Even when outnumbered, the sheer audacity of the Hellcats gave soldiers the belief that German steel could be humbled. That belief mattered. In the freezing woods of the Ardennes, morale was a weapon as valuable as any tank gun. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, Psychological Evaluation, 1946. The strategic impact was equally profound. Hellcats enabled flexibility where the front threatened to collapse. Their speed allowed commanders to plug gaps, reinforce weak points, and execute counterattacks before German breakthroughs became fatal. At St. Vith, for example, Hellcats played a critical role in slowing German advances long enough for reinforcements to arrive. Their ability to redeploy across icy roads at unheard-of speeds meant that American defenses could bend but not break. After-action report, 7th Armored Division, December 1944. For German crews, the humiliation deepened. They had entered the Ardennes expecting to dominate with superior firepower. Instead, they found themselves stalked, flanked, and ambushed by machines that should not have existed. Panthers that should have ruled the battlefield became lumbering targets, their crews watching helplessly as fast-moving enemies dictated the terms of engagement. The frustration boiled over in diaries and interrogation reports. One Panther gunner scrawled in his notes, "Our gun is strong, our armor strong, but the enemy is faster, always faster." Bundesarchive, Panzer Diary, December 1944. Strategically, the Hellcat embodied the broader American advantage: mobility, coordination, and production. Each destroyed Hellcat could be replaced in weeks. Each destroyed Panther drained Germany's dwindling war economy for months. This asymmetry compounded the psychological damage. German crews knew that even if they scored kills, more Hellcats would appear. American crews knew that their losses, painful though they were, did not cripple the larger war effort. The Ardennes campaign proved that the hidden advantage of the Hellcat, its speed, its radios, its doctrine, was not a gimmick. It was a force multiplier. When combined with air power and artillery, it turned German offensives into pyres of wasted fuel and shattered steel. Every ambush delayed the German timetable. Every Panther flanked and destroyed weakened the offensive's spearhead, and as the German momentum faltered, the Allies regained the initiative, pushing back across the snow-covered fields in January 1945. The psychological pendulum had swung. Before, German tank crews swaggered into battle with near-religious faith in their armor. After the Ardennes, they entered combat with doubt gnawing at their confidence. Could their heavy machines catch these racing hunters? Could they ever dominate when the enemy refused to stand still? Doubt, once seeded, spread like wildfire, and doubt kills as surely as shells. For American tank destroyer crews, the Ardennes was both vindication and torment. They had proven their doctrine on the grandest stage. They had shown the world that speed could blunt even the might of German armor, but they had paid dearly. Hellcat losses in the Bulge were severe. Crews remembered comrades consumed in fireballs, vehicles split open by shells, snow stained black by burning fuel. To fight in a Hellcat was to live with death at your shoulder. Yet they embraced it, because the machine demanded nothing less. By war's end, the strategic and psychological impact of the Hellcat was undeniable. It had not been the thickest, nor the strongest, nor the most feared, but it had been something new, something that undermined German doctrine at its core. It had proven that armor was not invincibility, that speed could erode supremacy, and that belief in a machine, in a doctrine, in survival through velocity, could shift the tide of war. The Ardennes was the crucible in which these truths were hammered into history, and when the snow melted, The wrecks of Panthers and Hellcats alike lay scattered across the forests, silent monuments to a clash of philosophies. But only one philosophy would survive into the post-war world. The legacy of the Hellcat was about to extend beyond the fields of Europe, into the doctrines of the Cold War, and beyond. For though the Hellcat itself would be retired, its lesson, that speed, coordination and psychology could outweigh brute strength, would echo through every armored battle to come. The war ended in May 1945, but the echoes of the M18 Hellcat did not fall silent with the guns of Europe. Across the ruined towns, shattered forests and burned-out fields where Panthers once prowled, the lesson of the Hellcat lingered, a whisper carried into the doctrines of nations rebuilding for the wars yet to come. Its legacy was not measured in the number of tanks it destroyed, nor in the battles it won outright, but in the fundamental idea it carved into the marrow of modern armored warfare, that speed, agility and coordination could outmatch brute strength. The Hellcat itself would not fight in the Cold War as it had in France. By the late 1940s, the US Army phased it out, replacing it with newer vehicles built for the nuclear age. Yet in training grounds and manuals, its influence remained. Commanders studied after-action reports from the Ardennes and Lorraine, highlighting how velocity and radios had crippled Germany's armored doctrine. Officers who had watched Hellcats race past Panthers carried those lessons forward into the design of post-war armor. Army Ordnance Board Proceedings, 1946. NATO planners in the early 1950s faced a terrifying question: how to stop the tidal wave of Soviet armor poised across the Iron Curtain. They looked back not to Tigers or Shermans but to the Hellcat's doctrine. If Warsaw-packed tanks came in massive waves, speed and ambush, not brute duels, would blunt them. Reconnaissance units, missile-armed light vehicles, and even helicopters borrowed the Hellcat's principle: strike quickly, vanish and let agility replace armor. NATO Tactical Review, 1952. Even the Soviets took note. Captured reports and battlefield interrogations revealed their curiosity. They had relied on the T-34's balance of speed and armor to win at Kursk, but the Hellcat showed a purer form of velocity as weapon. Soviet designs like the PT-76 amphibious tank echoed this doctrine: mobility first, protection second. The Cold War became a laboratory where Hellcat philosophy lived on in unexpected ways. Beyond doctrine, the Hellcat's impact was psychological. It proved to every generation that invincibility was an illusion. German Panther crews had believed themselves masters of the battlefield, only to find themselves humiliated by machines that weighed half as much. This lesson seeped into military thought. Confidence could not rest on thickness of steel or caliber of gun, but on adaptability, timing, and speed. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, Morale Division Report, 1946. The Hellcat story also resonated with the men who fought inside it. Veterans spoke of the terror and exhilaration of riding a machine that demanded perfection. They recalled the roar of the right radial engine, the bone-rattling jolt of the 76mm firing, the rush of wind in their faces as they tore across open ground with no armor to protect them. For them, the Hellcat was both coffin and savior. It killed their friends but saved their divisions. It was fragile, yet it gave them the means to fight back against monsters they had once thought untouchable. Their voices, etched into oral histories, carry the weight of that paradox. Veterans History Project, Library of Congress, Interviews, 1980s. The Hellcat also lived on in memory because it was cinematic. Historians and enthusiasts alike describe it not only in numbers but in images: a low, sleek silhouette racing across a muddy field, smoke trailing as it vanished behind a ridge, German crews frozen in disbelief as their optics failed to catch up. Its very presence seemed written for the screen, a living metaphor for the idea that the smallest, fastest predator could outwit the largest beast. In modern conflicts, its ghost appears again and again. In the deserts of 1991, during Operation Desert Storm, M1 Abrams tanks used speed and coordination to shred Soviet-built T-72 Sev before they could fire. In Ukraine today, drones and light vehicles strike heavy tanks with similar philosophy, mobility and precision outweighing bulk and armor. Each time, the lesson is the same one the Hellcat taught in 1944. In modern war, connection outweighs firepower and speed defeats armor. The German Panther remains a symbol of engineering brilliance. a machine built for dominance. But its defeat at the hands of the Hellcat is a reminder that brilliance without adaptability can become a coffin. The Hellcat was not elegant, nor invincible, nor heavily armed. It was something else. A machine that weaponized time itself, turning seconds into survival, minutes into victories. It forced enemies to fight battles on its terms, short, fast, unpredictable, and in doing so, it rewrote the balance of fear. In the museums where Hellcats sit today, painted in olive drab and silent as statues, visitors see only steel and rivets. But those who know the history see more. They see the smoke of Lorraine, the snow of the Ardennes, the disbelief in German eyes as a 20-ton blur raced past their 45-ton fortress. They hear the echo of radios, the bark of the 76mm, the scream of the engine, and they understand that this machine was not just a weapon, but an idea. An idea that speed is armor, that mobility is survival, that war is not only won by those who strike hardest, but by those who strike fastest. The Hellcat proved that truth in 1944, and though its tracks no longer scar the earth, its legacy races on through every battlefield where velocity, not mass, decides the victor.